While the release of the PS1 was when gaming started to embrace its dark, gritty side, the PlayStation 2 began an era where developers decided to get really grim with it. If you've been playing a lot of Battle for Bikini Bottom, as you should, but need the complete opposite of a palate cleanser, these dark PS2 games could be just what you need. Let's open with the game that has the potential to be the darkest PS2 game of all time, and also quite the Moorish snack, if you're Galactus. Developed by Nippon Ichi Software, who are best known for their tactical strategy RPG games like Disgaea, Soul Nomad and The World Eaters, follows Raver, a young hero who is forced to call upon the demonic power of Gig in order to defeat the reawakened World Eaters that threaten their entire planet. Now, that doesn't sound that dark, but the actual game itself deals with a lot of heavy subject matters, such as murder, slavery, and more. Not lovely stuff, yes, more. The cost of life in the Soul Nomad world is pretty cheap at the best of times, but that's without getting into the infamous demon path, which you can unlock at the very start of the game when you're meant to ask if you know what your mission/purpose is. Choosing the options that are marked with a skull and crossbones will lock players into the demon path, which is orders of magnitude darker than the rest of the game. It was dark anyway, but all of those atrocities and evil things are perpetrated by the villains you're trying to stop. But in the demon path, you're leading the group that's killing everyone. You're the one responsible for the destruction of the entire world, and we do mean the entire world. Follow the path all the way to the end, and the game's heroes and villains join together in one last-ditch attempt to stop you, but if you win, you receive the bad ending. Segue gang, it doesn't get darker than the destruction of everything that exists, so we might have peaked too early. I guess we're suffering for our art. This'll be shocking info to absolutely no one, particularly because you're watching a dark PS2 video, but if you make an action horror game set in a prison starring death row inmates, the subject matter is probably going to be pretty dark. The Suffering definitely didn't disappoint in that regard. Main character Talk's battle against demons leads to one of the goriest and most depraved adventures on the PS2. It's called The Suffering for a reason, it's not The Successing. An action horror rather than a straight-laced survival horror experience, The Suffering follows Talk as he serves time on death row for the murder of his wife and 2 children. Talk doesn't actually have any memory of the event in question, and as the player, you actually get to control the fate of Talk's family through the in-game morality system, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. While waiting to be executed at the Abbott State Penitentiary on Carnet Island, the prisoner is hit by an earthquake and subsequently besieged by demonic creatures called malefactors, leaving Talk and the poor prisoners forced to fight in order to survive this nightmare. Demons vs Humans isn't the darkest tale ever told, but the malefactors themselves help kick things up a notch. Rather than just being generic monster fodder, each type of malefactor is inspired by a type of death that occurred throughout the history of Carnet Island. It's a prison, so a lot of them make simple sense, but then there's Festers, who are reincarnations of slave traders who left their slaves tied up in the hold of a marooned ship to be eaten by rats. Fun times. Wish Punchline had some fun times back in the day though. If you were to believe the outrage that emerged from the pre-release of Rule of Rose in Europe, you'd think this one game was responsible for all of the evils in the world, or at least pizza crust stuffed with tomato. If you like that, please explain why down below. Ahead of the game's launch, EU Justice Commissioner Franco Frattini was screaming until he was blue in the face that Rule of Rose contained the likes of children buried alive underground, in-game sadomasochism and underage eroticism. You know, classic moral panic bollocks, but it kind of worked, unfortunately. Despite Rule of Rose being given ratings of 15+, 17+, and 16+ by Sero, ESRB, and Peggy respectively, Franco's moral panic and the subsequent misguided haranguing by the British press led to publisher 505 Games pulling Rule of Rose from sale in the UK. That limited release explains why physical copies of Rule of Rose have become so expensive here, but did the game feature any of the dark content that Franco Frattini wailed over? No, of course not. But that doesn't mean Rule of Rose is a walk in the park. Set in the 1930s, Rule of Rose follows 19-year-old Jennifer as she's kidnapped and forced onto an airship by some savage children known as the Red Rose Aristocracy. The story from here is told over the course of months, and as the game goes on, the events of the present and the events of Jennifer's past begin to merge. Spoiler alert, but a lot of kids and one unlucky dog end up getting murdered, and there's a little bit of suicide thrown in on top. It makes the moral panic so weird though. Focus on the truth, not this made up crap. Fabricating evidence is something a crooked cop would do. A game that's either darker in theory or unintentionally, depending on how you want to look at it. Narc was a PS2 reboot of an old school side-scrolling beat-em-up. Cops in that game operated with about as much prejudice and violence as I do when someone says something negative about C12 Final Resistance, but no one ever would, because it's a perfect video game. Shoot first, shoot later, maybe inscribe the questions on your bullets. You get the point. The old Williams Electronics game might have faded into obscurity with no hope of a follow-up, but Viz Entertainment and Midway decided that they'd try and have another go at giving Narc its time to shine. The result was the 2005 PS2 and original Xbox game of the same name. Players control either disgraced narcotics officer Jack Forzensky or DEA agent Marcus Hill, as the two are forced to cooperate to stop the advance of a new designer drug called Liquid Soul. No, not quite. Considering the two's first encounter with Liquid Soul sees a nearly dead drug dealer basically resurrecting themselves and gunning down 8 cops, clearly Liquid Soul is a dangerous drug. Would be a shame if you could get high on that supply. Yes, Narc's key gimmick was that despite playing as an officer of the law, players could sell and use the drugs they confiscated from the criminals, with using the drugs conveying certain temporary stat buffs as you play. The downside comes with the chance of addiction, with more serious drugs having more serious addiction chances. That's pretty dark on its own, but you can also operate with relative impunity as a policeman, battering or shooting everyone on the street and only suffering a mere slap on the wrist. That's twinsane. No, I'm not talking about Crash Twinsanity again. Thankfully, that's the darkest game on PS2. One of the great things about the PS2 is that the library is so vast, you'll often rediscover video games you saw one time at your local Blockbuster and then never again. Take Evil Twin Cyprian's Chronicles for instance, a dark, broody platformer. You'd think this would have appealed to some teen angst during childhood, but for whatever reason, Evil Twin ended up fading into obscurity. Shame really, because the game is both dark and pretty imaginative. Also released for the Dreamcast, a console that was always stuck on the darkest timeline, Evil Twin follows Cyprian, if you can believe it, who was raised in an orphanage for much of his young life. You see, both of his parents died on his birthday. No amount of copies of Jak 2 could fix that one. That's already quite the dark origin story for a child, but Evil Twin opens with a bit of darkly comical miscommunication. His friends at the orphanage chuck him a surprise birthday party, which is probably the worst thing you can do for someone who lost his mum and dad on that day. Naturally, he storms off to his bedroom to be comforted by his teddy bear and imaginary friend Lenny, but Cyprian lashes out, so he and his friends are then all kidnapped by dark tentacles and dragged to Underbed. You get it? Clever. While the rest of the game from there isn't all that dark for an adult, Evil Twin Cyprian's Chronicles works because it explores dark-ish themes through the eyes of a child. Dealing with depression and grief as a kid would cause you to push people away, as shown by the titular evil twins of everyone in Cyprian's life ruling different areas of Underbed. As for the game itself, it's a fairly standard platformer with an admittedly kinda wonky camera, but the overall core is solid and the story is well-meaning in its use of dark themes. It's probably last on the list of games for Night Dive 2 Remaster, but it's definitely not going to be haunting your PS2 collection. Alright, look, I don't think there's a way to cover the depth of the darkness in Haunting Ground without it getting a bit too yellow symbol of doom, because this one is more than a little bit on the messed up side. What starts out as a seemingly ordinary-ish PS2 survival horror game featuring an underpowered girl and her new dog best friend working together to try and defeat the different people trying to kill her takes some turns that are uncomfortable. Haunting Ground starts out innocently enough, or as innocent as you can really get for a horror game. Lead character Fiona visits her parents. Nice. They die in a car crash. Not nice. Fiona awakens inside a cage within a castle. That's not nice either, where she befriends a dog called Huey. Nice, good boy. As she explores the castle, she finds its denizens are uniquely obsessed with her, but less in a stan way and more in a stab way. There isn't a good way to be obsessed with someone or a particular pop group from South Korea, but Fiona's obsessors are nasty, nasty. The starting boss isn't great, with this big lad thinking Fiona is one of his dolls, but worse is waiting. From maid Daniela, jealous of Fiona's ability to experience pleasure and create life, to Ricardo, who's a clone of Fiona's dad who plans on some rather, unconventional means, to put it lightly, in a not yellow symbol of doom way, in order to create an immortal clone of himself. Can you read between the lines at all? Playing as Fiona in Haunting Ground is terrifying. It's a lot. Anyway, back to more fun stuff, like putting a plastic bag over a man's face and suffocating them until they turn purple and die. Yay! So yeah, you probably knew either Manhunt or Manhunt 2 were going to be in here in some capacity. Your hunting mans, not hugging mans. Perhaps the grimmest and darkest game on PS2 not named Barbie's Horse Adventure, Rockstar's original Manhunt was pretty bleak in its own right. As James Earl Cash, a name which is still so damn cool, you've been kidnapped and forced to take part in a snuff film by a sadistic director, meaning you have to use both wiles and brutality in order to survive. The game would then keep score of your performance and kill throughout the level, which makes sense as a snuff film would want the most depraved stuff possible, right? It's this contextual distinction that let Manhunt be sold in most countries, even if there was still plenty of banning and controversy surrounding the game. Manhunt 2, though, is another story entirely. The game's plot revolves around governmental conspiracies, mind control, and sleeper agents, so why is Daniel Lamb, the protagonist of the second game, still carving people up like he's in a snuff film? It's this perceived casual sadism that led to the BBFC banning Manhunt 2 initially because it was so dark. The ESRB also gave it an adults-only rating, meaning everyone refused to sell the game, effectively making it banned. The removal of the score system helped get Manhunt 2 actually classified and sold. The rest of the game was very normal and chill. Right, let's not coo on about this one for any longer. A recurring theme in the work of From Software has been the cycle of death and rebirth. Practically every single Soulsborne game has some kind of plot or subtext about how the endless pursuit of immortality is corruptive to either the world, the soul, or both. Kuon isn't their first game to explore similar stuff, but it is their most forgotten. A survival horror game set during the Heian period of Japan's history, Kuon is split between 3 phases with their own playable characters. It's set in and around Fujiwara Castle, which is special because of 2 magical mulberry trees that produce silkworms, with these silkworms then reviving the dead nearby. Sounds like a good deal, right? Of course not, as the resurrected dead come back as flesh-hungry monsters who need to absorb other living creatures in order to sustain the resurrection. It's gross and it's devastating to the regular people who just want to live a normal life, as everyone else becomes the victim of power-hungry psychopaths hoping to defy the cycle of death. Players use magical spells to dispel the monsters roaming the now haunting corridors. The monster designs are suitably disgusting, as you'd expect from a FromSoft developed joint, while the atmosphere and tone are among the most oppressive and disturbing among the PS2's offerings. Sure, the actual gameplay has aged about as well as your dad's NFT portfolio, but between the dark story and horrific monsters you encounter, Kuon is worth checking out after a few Google searches, if you catch our meaning, matey. Remember, it's not piracy if the game isn't available to purchase, don't get it twisted. The Twisted Metal TV show might play up the idea of a post-apocalyptic automotive blood sport for laughs, but make no mistake, people explicitly killing each other for money and or our entertainment is pretty dark. Twisted Metal Black understood this, which was considered to be a reboot for the series after 4 installments on the PS1 in 5 years. That's crazy to think of now. The core of Twisted Metal Black is the same as it ever was. Chronic ne'er-do-well and all-round bad egg Calypso has given a bunch of violent psychopaths and hopelessly desperate loners the chance to achieve their one true wish. All they need to do is survive a game of people in cars firing heat-seeking missiles at each other. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, the issue is that Calypso is about as trustworthy as as a snake who's selling snake oil. The oil made of snake, or is the snake made of oil? Anyone who entered the contest with bad intentions is liable to get what they want out of Calypso, while the few that had somewhat good intentions, like Jon Douglas, the amnesiac who just wanted to figure out his past, gets royally screwed over. Most of the stories concern someone either trying to get revenge or becoming a more efficient killer, with the entire story playing out like a descent into a bloodbath. But one of the darkest stories concerns Preacher. As the name would imply, Preacher was going about his duties with a baptism one day, only for him to become possessed by a demon and murder everyone in attendance. Calypso offers Preacher a chance to learn the truth, which Preacher takes to mean that he'll find the demon responsible and be declared innocent, but the truth is that Preacher is a violent schizophrenic. All those murders were just him losing the plot. What fun. For that added bit of darkness, there's an unlockable character called Minion, who's almost as evil as those yellow bastards, and he doesn't have a typical story. However, his loading screen quotes are coded messages that players have deciphered over the years, suggesting that the entire events of the game all take place in Sweet Tooth's serial killer brain. Well done to whoever clocked that one. Say what you want about the trope, but a lot of horror games have been built off the idea of a woman having to outwit or outmaneuver a bigger, more intimidating and overwhelming foe. We've already seen that in this video with Haunting Ground, but the Clock Tower series had been doing that already long before Fiona played one woman and her dog in a gothic castle. While pretty interesting, the PS2's Clock Tower 3 isn't really considered to be the best that the genre has to offer, in part due to the fact that the game replaced the usual point-and-click gameplay style for direct control over the protagonist. Turns out this very specific brand of survival horror is a tad less stressful when you can properly move a character instead of just clicking intensely on a couch and waiting for your character to go there. Still, Clock Tower 3 did give players another great installment of the girl being chased by serial killers series, with Clock Tower 3 arguably being the darkest of the bunch. Part of that is because there's no longer one Scissor Mans, it's the Scissor Twins. At least they aren't sisters. Clock Tower 3 follows a 14-year-old girl called Alyssa Hamilton, who you find out is the latest in the family's long line of Ruders. Far from being huge fans of the glorious one himself, Ruders are young girls with supernatural powers and the enemies of entities. These entities are powerful creatures that possess mortal men to make them commit mass murder, making the human a subordinate. Alyssa travels through time, protecting people from entity and subordinate activity, only to find the call coming from inside the house. Spoiler alert for Clock Tower 3. It turns out right that her grandfather, Dick by name and Dick by nature, has transformed into the Dark Gentleman and plans to rip Alyssa's heart out and drink her blood in order to become an entity himself. That's a dick move, you dick. Now why don't you not be a dick and watch the outro? It's really cool. Outro gang, oh, it's pretty dark now, let me just turn the light on quick. Outro gang, that was just a look at some dark PS2 games. How many of these changed your childhood when you played them when you shouldn't have? Half of them for me personally. If you have any other dark PS2 games to recommend, drop them down below. Obviously, I didn't put Silent Hill 2, 3, 4 on it because, it's obvious, I don't need to talk about them anymore, do we? Do you want to see this for the PS3 or any other consoles? Dark, I don't know, Wonder Swan games? If you fancy that, let me know down below. Wonder Swan fans, flap your wings down there. I've been Jimmy for Culture Vultures. Thanks to all our members for membering, and thanks for watching.